Hi, I'm Apostle Darko, and today we're going to be talking about a very important subject. It's controversial, but very important. And that is God responsible for everything? Everything in terms of what happens to us, who we are, what we give birth to. Is God responsible for everything? Now, in this video, I will attempt to show that one, God is not solely responsible for everything that happens to us as humans. Two, I'm going to attempt to show that God is not solely responsible for who we are and what we reproduce as human beings. And three, I'm going to show that God creates systems that men replicate. God creates systems that men replicate. And finally, I'm going to show that man is largely, or humans are largely responsible for who we are, what we reproduce, and what happens to us in our environment. So let's begin with the first point. I'm saying that God is not solely responsible for everything that happens to humans. There is this doctrine called fatalism. And fatalism is a doctrine that presupposes that everything has been designed and programmed. Everything that happens to man has already been designed and programmed in a way that man is hopeless as to any effort, any power to change circumstances. This is called fatalism. And this doctrine is espoused by and propagated by many religions, especially Islam and many other religions. But more importantly, there are a lot of Christians who espouse the doctrine of fatalism, either consciously or unconsciously. There are many people who think that everything that we are and do and everything that happens to us is from God. Sometimes we blame God for all things that happen to us. And sometimes we use it to comfort ourselves when there are problems, like, well, it's all by God. Let's just give it to God. God allowed it to happen. God permitted it, or this is the work of God, and we comfort ourselves with such statements. But I want us to have a closer examination of these kind of thought patterns. Is God responsible for everything that happens in the world? No. God is not responsible for everything that happens in the world. In the first place, in 1 John chapter 3, verse 8, the Bible says Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came to destroy the works of the evil one. So there is the work of the evil one on earth. There is that which is identified as the work of the evil one. And we all know that the evil one is Satan. So if you believe that Satan is alive and is there, if you believe that Satan is active in the activities of men on earth, then you can also believe and trust that Satan is at work. The Bible says it. And the Bible specifically says, like I just said in 1 John chapter 3, verse 8, that the Son of Man was manifested to destroy the works of the evil one. In Luke chapter 13, verse 16, that woman that was bent over in the synagogue, who Jesus Christ healed on the day of Sabbath. Now, watch what Jesus Christ says. He says, this woman is a daughter of Abraham that Satan bound for 18 years. A daughter of Abraham bound by Satan. It's very easy for somebody to have said that, oh, the sickness is from God. Like, you remember that blind man, the man that was born blind, the apostles asked the question, is this the problem of his parents? Was he born blind because of the problem of his parents, or why, or his own fault? But Jesus Christ said this woman was bound, had been bound by Satan. So we know that Satan is at work, and Satan causes a lot of havoc in the lives of men. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 29 to 30, Jesus Christ talks about the strong man, a strong man fully armed who watches over his household, and how it is difficult for anyone to come and take anything from that household. Of course, that strong man is Satan. His household are the things of this world, the world and the things in it. You remember in Luke chapter 6, when Satan was tempting Jesus Christ, he offered him the things of this world, the kingdoms of this world, and their glory. And he added that it has been given to me, and I can give to whomever I will. Jesus didn't challenge him and say, no, it's not been given to you. Because Jesus knows that he was speaking the truth, at least for that time. Because these things have been given to Adam and Eve. They were the superintendents, they were the managers of God's creation. And when Adam and Eve bowed to Satan, when they disobeyed God and obeyed Satan, and they became slaves to Satan, whatever they owned also became the property of Satan. So Satan was able to tell Jesus Christ to his face that you bow to me, I'll give you these kingdoms and their glories. All right. So the Bible makes it clear that Satan is a strong man, and the things of this world and the people of this world have been taken captive. Human beings are captives of the devil. That's what the Bible says in Luke chapter 4, verse 18, that Jesus Christ came to set the captives free. Captives of whom? Captives of Satan, the strong man. All right. So we know that not everything that is happening in the world is caused by God. Many of the things are caused by God's arch enemy, Satan. Besides, there is human responsibility also. Sometimes, people do careless things, and then when they have problems, they say, well, God arranged it to be so. No, God didn't arrange it to be so. So this whole thing of fatalism, a fatalistic doctrine, sometimes it is made for us to shirk our responsibility, to try to escape, some kind of escapism, not to be responsible for the things that we've done, and to point a finger at God and say that He is responsible for everything. So God is not responsible for everything, or else Jesus Christ would have been working against the will of God when He cast out demons, when He healed the sick, when He calmed the storm. If it was God's will that the apostles would drown in the boat, then Jesus Christ would have been acting against the will of God by calming the storm. If it had been the will of God that people should be born blind and people should be lame and paralyzed, then Jesus Christ would have been working contrary to the will of God when He healed the sick and calmed the storms. Right. So first point, God is not responsible for everything that happens to us. There is an arch enemy of God called Satan who contributes a lot to what happens to us. And thirdly, we ourselves are responsible. The Bible says that in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the Bible says that all the things that happened to the Jews happened to them because they did not believe. They provoked God in the wilderness. And the Bible says these things are written to serve as an example for us so that we'll not repeat their mistakes. So our mistakes have consequences. Our choices have consequences. We cannot just, throw everything to God and say, God is responsible for everything. No, God is not responsible for everything that happens to mankind. Satan is also responsible, and we are responsible ourselves. Point number 2, God is not solely responsible for who we are and the children we procreate. Now, what I want to say is that God created the first two human beings, Adam and Eve, 100% products of God. He created them from the earth and breathed his breath into them, his spirit into them, and they became living souls. Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. So, in terms of content, their body content, their spirit soul content, everything came from God. But after that, after Adam and Eve, all the people that were reproduced by Adam and Eve, they inherit certain properties from their parents, from Adam and Eve, and certain properties from God. God is no longer responsible for every aspect of our looks, of our genetic composition, of our height, the pigmentation of our skin, the color of our eyes. No. Now, so God created man in his image. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, 27, the Bible says God created man in his image. We're talking about Adam and Eve. God created Adam and Eve in his image and likeness. Okay, so those two people were created in the image and likeness of God. And when we talk about image and likeness, the word image in the Hebrew form depicts a representation, something that represents another thing, a visible thing, either in stone or clay or wood or something that represents something else. So that an image is different from an idol. Sometimes we use the word idol in a rather ignorant way, because the people who bow down to stones, stone carvings, and sculpture, and other image in clay moldings and other things, you do not suppose that they are actually worshiping the idol as we suppose, the image. So we call it idolatry because we think that they are bowing down to the image, they are bowing down to the physical representation. But in reality, they are not bowing down to the physical representation. They are bowing down to what that image represents. For instance, the image of a man, the image of we call anthropomorphic images and thermomorphic images. Anthropomorphic images are images in the likeness of man. Thermomorphic images are images that look like animals. Okay, so the animals, for instance, they are not bowing down to a cow, a golden calf, but they are rather bowing down to the spirit that they suppose, is behind the golden calf. That's why when Jesus Christ said, those who worship idols, those who sacrifice to idols are sacrificing to demons. So the real context is that it is not the image, but the demons. So the image of God means that human beings are created to represent God, to be part of the divine nature, the corporeal thing of God who is incorporeal. We are having a body, and God does not have a body, but we are there to represent God, just like the idol represents a spirit. We are the image and likeness of God, having a corporeal existence to represent God who has not got a corporeal existence. So it means that when people come to us, they are when we live on earth, we are representing God as images of God. All right. So God created the first two human as in his own image and his own likeness. And then after that, what happens? Men reproduce. Right? So the third point is that God created systems, and men replicate those systems. The system of reproduction has been put there by God. If you go to the book of Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, you will see the systems, whether they are plants, that produce fruit that have seeds in them. The phrase that they have their seeds within them is talking about a system that can reproduce itself. So God creates systems. Adam and Eve had a system that can be reproduced. And what science does is to study, identify, understand the system, and try to replicate. That's what all science is about. Science doesn't create anything. Okay, so I'm going to show that human beings, when we are born, there are three inputs into what we are. There is an input of a man, there's an input of a woman, and there's input of God. All right? So that it's not just, it's simple to say, God created me the way I am. It's partly true, partially true, but your father is responsible also. Your mother is also responsible. The people that we choose to marry are responsible for the children that we reproduce. If I were married to, for instance, a Caucasian, my children would not be what they are today. I'm married to a black woman like me, an African woman like me. Our children are a reproduction of me and Cecilia. If I'd married somebody else, I would have reproduced different children. Is God responsible for who I am? Yes, God has his responsibility in terms of the input, his input, and we'll look at that, in the second video. God has his input, but my father has an input, and my mother also has an input. All right, so in this first video, I just want to say, one, God is not responsible for everything that happens to you. Two, God is not responsible for everything that you are and everything that you reproduce. God has responsibility. Your father has a responsibility. Your mother has a responsibility. In the same way, you have a responsibility as to what you choose to reproduce. God, indeed, plays a role, but men and women also play a role. I'll go into more details in our next video. God bless you. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. See you.